This is the Flask 107, 107. It is another Martin Quaid comic, and it ties into the Underworld Unleashed crossover. I wanted to look at this because when you have the writer of the crossover writing a series, and then they do a tie-in to their crossover, you have one of two things. Either you have an issue that is a lot more important to the crossover than it should be, or you have an issue like this where you get to see the crossover writer do what he imagines the tie-ins to his crossover should be. Also, Captain Marbles, the real one, Biffy Baston, guest stars. One thing I do want to counter early on is I reckon some people probably think I have sold out and I'm now shilling for Martin Quaid. I'm not. I don't even like this issue, actually. But I feel I said what needs to be said about Martin Quaid in that other video, and repeating it time and time again is pointless. I also believe that dismissing or hating something because the writer is scum, or ripping this comic to pieces just because it is a Martin Quaid one, is about the same attitude as blindly praising stuff. I have some criticisms for this, and yeah, Martin Quaid sucks, and he is scum, but it would be a waste of time to review this issue without actually critically assessing it and just writing it off instead, because I think Martin Quaid sucks and he is scum. This first page has something I have not seen Martin Quaid do that much even. He commits what I call the Kurt Busey scripting offence. This crop of writers don't understand the fine balance real comic book writers strike between narration and dialogue. Kurt Busey is notoriously painful at it, but the idea is that you should punctuate your narration to not muddy up the dialogue and vice versa. Here we have narration, then dialogue happens, and then we get back to the narration, which continues on from where the last bit of narration left off. And it does so very badly because you cannot continue on a sentence between dialogue. You cannot have two streams of writing going on at the same time and haphazardly go back and forth between them mid-sentence. I don't care if you can point me to when Albert Moore did it once, or when even Stanley Lee or someone did something like that. This era of writer, the late 90s fake fanboy loser brigade, they have absolutely no understanding of the complexities of balancing these two parts of comic book writing. There is no purpose for cutting back and forth between the two styles of writing here. Anyway, this scene has Necron, the crossover bad guy, take Shadow King's soul and hands him some more power. I will actually point out, in Underworld Unleashed, issue 1, we do see Shadow King with all the bad guys on the double splash page. I need to find some way to highlight characters when I cut away to stuff like this. He is right next to Crystal Frost. He is a shadow. You might not be able to see him. And then a few pages later, when some of the Villians have accepted Necron's proposal, you see him again with his new powered up look. He's to the right of Deathshot on this double splash page. Some things that I like are that Willie West's girlfriend, Rebecca Chang, she is at some reporters conference thing, and she is meant to be meeting up with one of her colleagues, another reporter who she really respects, and that reporter is none other than Biffy Baston. Love that touch. The other bit I love is here as well, when Biffy Baston says the magic word shebang to transform into Captain Marbles, the real one. Before the lightning bolt can hit him and transform him, the Flask rushes in and saves this kid from being struck by lightning. I thought that was a nice solid idea to put in. A sensible scene to have between the two heroes. A clever use of them. The rest of the issue, I don't really like much. It is a bit of a mix of a mediocre plot with not very good writing attached. I think there is a lot more fun you could have between these two characters, but this is about as run-of-the-mill and impersonal as you can get. I don't feel either of these heroes bond over the course of this story. And another problem you have is that our bad guy is underwritten. Shadow King's powers have been expanded by Necron to now allow him to transform other people and things into shadows. I'm not sure why the Flask or Captain Marbles, the real one, Biffy Baston, would be the two heroes that you would want to have fight this bad guy. They don't really have any powers that can be used against Shadow King. But I suppose Captain Marbles, he can summon some lightning to illuminate things. That is about it. I don't really get what else you can do with these heroes fighting Shadow King. The Flask can run away from his shadows, I guess. But originally, Shadow King was a Stephen Altman bad guy. And that is about the extent of my knowledge on his history. I don't cheat when I do these. I could have looked up when he first appeared, but all these history lessons I'm doing come from my own memory. I think he was introduced in the 60s, and here is my logic as to why. If he was a Goldie Age Stephen Altman enemy, I reckon he would have been in Stir-Fry Squadron at some point. And he was not. He is maybe Stephen Altman's arch nemesis. And I suppose what is interesting is that despite Stephen Altman being rebooted a dozen times, Shadow King seems impervious to that. Shadow King is always there as a Stephen Altman bad guy, no matter which iteration of Stephen Altman it is. And I don't think they really overhaul him that much. He also is one of those DC bad guys who often appears as bad guy fodder. He'll be on teams that fight the Justice League, or he'll be one of those generic bad guys writers use to have a new hero fight. I don't know much about him other than he has shadow powers. and I assume he is the main thing in the Stephen Altman Shadow War story. He is still around. I remember seeing covers with him on for that recent Stephen Altman ongoing, which I controversially hated massively. I feel like that was a slightly interesting detour because in this instance, I didn't actually know any of the facts about him. And then we have this page, which is perfect for a point I want to make about this story. Throughout the issue, Martin Quaid cannot decide on how much the Flask knows about Captain Marbles, the real one, Biffy Baston. On the top of this page, he asks how Captain Marbles, the real one, Biffy Baston, is so fast. And he learns that Captain Marbles, the real one, Biffy Baston, he has the speed of Mercury. So presumably we are going with the idea that the Flask has almost never met Captain Marbles, the real one, Biffy Baston, before this. But then on the bottom of the page, for the sake of a witty closer, the Flask expresses clear knowledge on Captain Marbles, the real one, Biffy Baston, having the wisdom of Solomon. It's terribly inconsistent writing and really paints the picture of Martin Quaid, half arson, everything here. And it's still much better than this fucking garbage story beat here. It turns out Shadow King wants revenge against this scientist man. And we spend so much time on exposition and backstory dumping for this scientist to explain why and how he knows Shadow King and how he is to blame for something that Shadow King wants revenge for. This issue stars the Flask. It guest stars Captain Marbles, the real one, Biffy Baston. Our bad guy is Shadow King, and by extension, Necron. Willie West's girlfriend, Rebecca Chang, is there too. These are all far more intriguing or exciting prospects than this random scientist who feels guilty about some shit. It really takes time away and makes this bit where Captain Marbles, the real one, Biffy Baston, holds up a monorail, it makes this feel less spectacular. In fact, it was not until I went through this to do a page-by-page breakdown for my notes that I even realised what we were seeing here was something actually impressive. When reading the issue, it had been drowned out by the expository bullshit. This is the extent of planning I do for my videos. I'm sure I've shown something like this before. I don't script anything. Occasionally, I do when it is something I want to get just right, or where it is a delicate point that I really cannot afford to confuse. But yeah, I mainly just write down what is on which page so I know where to focus, and maybe have a prompt or two for what is the ideal thing to talk about there. I get all the cutaways afterwards. Sometimes I do have in mind exactly what I am cutting away to though. So Shadow King, he comes after the boring professor, and if I wanted to, I could probably psychoanalyze Martin Quaid and ask the question why in an issue with all these interesting and larger than life characters he wants to hinge the story around a random professor and reduce another bad guy to being motivated by a revenge story. It makes you wonder why Shadow King has never mentioned this before. Why has he spent all these years badgering Stephen Oakman when his true enemy was this scientist who ratted him out? Then we have exactly what I said. Captain Marbles, the real one, Biffy Baston, he summons a lightning bolt to combat the darkness of Shadow King's powers. And that is him more or less defeated. A really rubbish story here. I felt nothing for any of the characters, and the focus was on the completely wrong thing. There was some potential here. Who doesn't want to see a neat team-up issue between these two characters? This isn't it, though. There were a couple of pages at the start that I felt were doing worthwhile stuff with having the two crossover. But after that, both Captain Marbles, the real one, Biffy Baston, and even the Flask became afterthoughts to the story. And when it comes to crossing over, our ending acts as a direct lead-in to the Flask scene in Underworld Unleashed issue 2. If I had thought about it, I should have reviewed this before that, but it doesn't really matter. I doubt you care much about me looking at the tie-in later than I should have. Yeah, I'm not recommending this. It is not good. Lots of bad habits and quirks in here, and it underplays the entire appeal of the issue. I'm not destroying it, so you can still say I am going soft on Martin Quaid. But this isn't good at all. I feel a 7 thumbs up is me being generous.